Welcome to Keeping It Green, a podcast for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts, with hosts Margaret, Pickoff, and Tom Butzler.
Hello, and welcome to Keeping It Green, a podcast from Penn State Extension for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts. I'm one of your hosts, Margaret Pickoff. I'm a horticulture educator with Penn State Extension, and each episode I'll be joined by one of my colleagues on the green industry team as a co-host. So on today's episode, my co-host is Tom Butzler. Hi, Tom.
How's it going, Margaret?
It's going pretty well. So on today's episode, we're going to be joined by Shari Edelson from the Arboretum at Penn State. But before we get to our interview with Shari, we like to chat a little bit about what we're seeing as extension educators or plant lovers out in the field or in our lives at this time of year. So what are you seeing, Tom?
Really, it's that time of year. Things have really slowed down. You get into the holiday season, and a lot of folks are taking a break from the plant world. There's not just much going on out there, but at least for the extension educators, we're really getting knee deep into planning for our winter meeting season. I mean, we have a number of these turf and ornamental conferences that are coming up. These are face-to-face, of course, and you're involved in those, Margaret, and the virtual offerings we have. So there's a lot of planning going on and preparing for those presentations, some of the information on that. So I do have to go out and do some field visits to some high tunnels, do some soil sampling for nematodes. So, still some stuff going on the plant world.
Nice.
How about you?
Well, so as you know, I do a lot of programming on invasive plant management. And so this is an interesting time of year because as I'm scrolling through social media, you see people with these sort of holiday decorations from foraged materials, and I'm always on the lookout for for branches of these really terrible invasive weeds that we spend all our time talking about and telling people how bad they can be for the environment, and then someone's like, look at this beautiful wreath of oriental bittersweet that
yes, that's the one I see most up here.
Yeah, so there, and some of those invasive plants that we have in the ornamental landscape, they do have really beautiful berries in the wintertime. And so I totally get it. But this serves as a public service announcement that we use American bittersweet if you can. Try not to move oriental bittersweet and Japanese barberry around if you can avoid it, even though they can be beautiful. So that's what I've had my eye on lately. So great. Well, let's get into our discussion with Shari. So I'd like to welcome on Shari Edelson, who is the outgoing Director of Operations at the Arboretum at Penn State. So welcome, Shari.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here with you guys.
Thanks for being on the show. So Tom and I both work with you at various points in the year. And I guess we like to start out by hearing about your role at the Penn State Arboretum. What does it entail? What does it mean to be Director of Operations?
Sure. So I've been at the Arboretum at Penn State for a little over 9 years now. And when I first started, the Arboretum was still quite young. So phase 1 of the gardens was only about 3 years old at that point. And over the time that I've been here, the place has grown immensely. So as that's happened, my role has also grown and changed. So when I first started, I was literally weeding, right? And now there are days when I don't touch a plant unless I deliberately leave my computer to go and touch some plants for therapeutic reasons. So
I think we can relate to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a lot of what I've done over the last 9 years has really been about helping to grow the Arboretum. And that's been in terms of both the physical space, the number of people that we engage. So in terms of the size of the team we actually have working in the gardens, the number of volunteers and community members who've gotten involved, and then also all the ways that we kind of interface with the public and with the larger university community. And then also, I should say, building the gardens themselves, so construction. So at this point, I've been involved in $100 million worth of construction projects.
Whoa.
Wow.
And that's for someone with a horticultural background. I don't come from the land of construction. So it's all been, just an absolutely amazing journey helping to build this place from the ground up.
So when you talked about the installation of these various gardens, I mean, what kind of time frame are you talking about from, how many years from the concept of the idea to fundraising to the implementation of the design and the final product?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the interesting things about the Arboretum is that we're almost completely funded through private contributions. So if we want to build something, anything in the gardens, we have to fundraise in order to do that. And that was true with the initial construction of phase 1 of the gardens. It was true with the children's garden expansion, and also true with our most recent expansion in the pollinator and bird garden. So typically what's happened, I shall back up and say that we have a sort of a landscape master plan that lays out what our goals for the space are. So we have this almost illustrated roadmap of how we want the gardens to look and the different spaces that we want to build. And that helps us to communicate with community members and people who are interested in donating so that they know what direction we're headed. That helps us gauge where everybody's interest is and helps us kind of focus in on what the priorities are for fundraising. So, for example, with our most recent construction project, the pollinator and bird garden, our recently retired founding director, Kim Steiner, was having conversations with folks on the faculty about that garden, from 2010.
Oh, okay.
And
wow.
Yeah, exactly. So preliminary conversations with folks in entomology and ornithology and plant biology about, what could a pollinator and bird garden look like here? How could it help your research or your course instruction? How could it help serve your needs? And then, of course, the final pollinator and bird garden was opened in July of 2021. So that's really like an 11-year arc from those early conversations through concept design, and then fundraising, and then retention of a design firm for the final design, putting together construction documents, putting it out to bid, getting contractors on board, and then actually building the thing.
Wow, long process.
It can take a really long time. Yeah. But typically, from the time that we actually break ground, once it's like, okay, bid documents are in, we have the actual, directions for how to build this, what you would call blueprints. From that point to the place opening is like, in the case of the pollinator and bird garden, it was about like 20 months or so. And it was similar with the children's garden. Yeah. So once like the construction fence goes up, as far as the public is concerned, it happens relatively quickly, but it's just that there could be like 8 years of conversations before we get, heavy equipment out.
I definitely want to talk more about the pollinator and bird garden because I think it's such an incredible space. And there are many reasons to visit the Arboretum, but I have just loved seeing, I've only been with Penn State a few years, but just seeing that space grow in that time, and it's so colorful and alive. And I do want to talk more about that that particular garden. But just to take a step back for those who haven't visited the Arboretum, so Tom and I have used it as a teaching space before. Tom hosts the Turf and Ornamentals conference there in the summer, and I know Sandy and Tim and I will host or will lead pest walks throughout the Arboretum and bring folks from the green industry around to see and identify different pests and diseases, which is really fun. So I've seen it kind of used in that capacity, but what other roles does the Arboretum play for students and for community members and people visiting?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of my favorite things about the Arboretum is really how much it means to so many different people. So you've talked a lot about how the spaces in the Arboretum are helpful for, advancing the work that you guys do in extension, right? And there are, other folks in, academic departments at the university for whom, our spaces are similarly helpful. There's a ton of faculty and student research that happens in the gardens every year. So in a typical academic year, we might have a dozen long-term research projects that are using either our plant collections or our grounds, or, studying all of the different organisms that make their homes in those spaces. There's also a lot of course instruction that happens there. So in a given academic year, we might have 40 or more classes that are teaching field sessions out in the gardens. And that can be the types of classes that you'd expect, like, field dendrology, right? Where students are learning to identify, woody plants in the landscape. It can also be classes in entomology. It can also actually be intro to photography classes, or we get a lot of undergraduate painting classes where the instructors are encouraging the students to do plein air landscape painting. We get classes coming from the College of Education, learning about place-based outdoor education and the sort of, how to teach in the outdoors. So really there's a cross-disciplinary interest across the university from instructors wanting to teach their students out in the gardens. Then there's also all of our the ways that we interface with the public. So, the Arboretum is open free of charge every single day of the year. And one of the basic things that we do is just be an open, welcoming space that has, no barriers to entry. So it's a place where everybody's welcome, and a place where, anybody can come and just enjoy some time outdoors. And I mean, you don't have to be an entomologist doing pollinator research. You don't have to have any goals beyond just finding a quiet, beautiful, sunny place to sit, or, taking a stroll with a cup of coffee with a friend or family. So I really feel like, that sort of element of like peace and respite and kind of quiet enjoyment is something that we're really committed to providing for people, no matter where they're coming from in life. And then, of course, we also get, visitors who are coming specifically to do kids and family programming with us, or to do, come and take one of our free bird walks or learn about plants with us. So it's all that.
Wow.
Yeah. So just on the public side of things, I noticed during the COVID that just people wanted to be outside, whether it was an unmanaged landscape, such as I live near like a lot of state forest, or managed landscapes. Did you notice a spike in visitation at the Arboretum during COVID? And then do you think that is carried over? I mean, was it just a fad, or people like, hey, I like interacting with plants. I like these open spaces.
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely did see, an enormous increase in the number of visitors that we had, during COVID. And it was one of those things that I think for all of us on the Arboretum team really helped us to feel like we were providing something that was meaningful for people, and that was really helping to de-stress people and improve quality of life, right? There's so much research that shows that time spent in nature can reduce stress and can lead to feelings of peace and happiness. And it was really gratifying to be able to just be providing, the space that people needed in order to feel better. And one thing that I think has happened is that people have been re-engaging with the natural world and sort of re-experiencing how wonderful it is to be outdoors and how low the barriers really are to being outdoors. Like, you don't have to hike Mount Everest in order to have a quality outdoor experience. You can just drive to the Arboretum and like find a sunny bench to sit at. And so I feel like we've really seen that as a re-engagement that has continued over time. So I think a lot of those people who rediscovered us as just a pleasant place to visit have kept coming out, even though we're sort of beyond the immediate, sort of catastrophic impacts of COVID. The Arboretum has seemed to continue to be, an important or a pleasant space in people's lives. And so that's something that makes us really happy, honestly. We just love it when people are able to enjoy the space and see a place for themselves there.
Yeah, just thinking
feel like we're doing the right thing,
Yeah, I was just thinking about the early phases of COVID and how scary that was to and how isolating that you didn't feel safe being indoors with anyone, even family members and close friends. And so to provide an outdoor space that does, and the Arboretum does have a lot of sitting spaces, a lot of places in shade and in the sun. And there's that really lovely kind of cabin structure in the pollinator and bird garden that has the water feature. And that is such a sort of such a lovely place to just sit and be alone or be with people. So that's lovely to hear that that maybe you got some visitors from the area who wouldn't have considered dropping by before, but sort of found that as a place that they could go and feel safe during COVID. Yeah, so I did want to ask you about the pollinator and bird garden, which I believe is the most recent of the gardens to be sort of added to the Arboretum space. And you said it opened in 2021.
Yeah, we opened that in July 2021. I'm so glad to hear that that you appreciate that space, because I feel like it was such an achievement for us and for everybody who collaborated with us on that project, from design through construction and planting, and now, the ongoing life and care of the garden. So it's a 3-acre garden space, and it was designed in deep collaboration with faculty in Penn State's Center for Pollinator Research, and then also Penn State's ornithology faculty. So both in the Department of Ecosystem Science and Management, and then also ornithologists at Penn State's Shavers Creek Environmental Center, who are bird experts. So we really started from the science and then built up to the design. We had some amazing designers who we brought on board from outside of the university to really help us to achieve the big goals. So the main landscape architect was Emmanuel Didier, who also did the landscape architecture for our children's garden. And then the planting designer was Claudia Vess from Phyto Studio, and she really specializes in ecological landscape design using regionally native plant species. So with this amazing team, we were able to start from the baseline of what environmental criteria are required to support healthy pollinator and bird populations, from soils through plants, through environmental characteristics, up through a design that would actually not just provide the space that those organisms need, but tell a coherent story that would be evident to human visitors, right? Oh, I see that you need lots of different habitat types. I see that, our native prairies and also our native woodlands are both important for supporting different populations of pollinators and birds. I see that both wild spaces and actively managed garden spaces can provide important habitat for pollinator and bird species. I see that these are some of the plants that maybe I could plant at home or in my neighborhood that could help increase biodiversity and provide beauty for, humans. So I feel like the garden, the reason that it is as amazing as it is because of the knowledge and contributions of all those people. And then, the reason that it looks the way it does now is because we have such a talented team of horticulturists and volunteers, and then also such an actively engaged crew of scientists who are doing research out there and giving us feedback. So it's one of these spaces where the construction, it's not one of those things where like you build a building, you're done building it, right? It's really a garden where we're actively caring for and managing and sculpting the space, every day of the year.
That is a neat garden. And on the unmanaged part of that pollinator garden, here's every time I walk by this always pops into my head. How are you going to manage those weeds? You have a wide variety of herbaceous plants that normally we don't see in a managed landscape. So we're not familiar with them. And then on top of that, you have a lot of open space on the ground for ground nesters, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to have these weed seeds are going to be coming in here. So is there a training program for the staff and volunteers that are going to help them distinguish between these desirable herbaceous plants and these other weeds are going to come in and try to fill those voids? I mean, nature abhors an empty niche, right? So what is the plan or strategy for that pest management of weeds?
Oh, Tom.
We had to go there.
No, I'm so glad you did, because I mean, we're gardeners, right? And like, one thing that gardeners do, or like when we're wearing our gardener goggles, like we're looking at a space as it exists now. And like when you put the gardener goggles on, you see the future of that space immediately. You're like, this is going to get too big for that space. This is going to turn into a weed patch. That species is short-lived and it's going to peter out over time. That species is super assertive and it's going to take over ground if we let it. So yeah, I'm glad to see that you came to the garden with the gardener goggles. But yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that we started thinking about, from the second we were planning the planting design. So it's a pretty diverse area of the gardens in terms of plant species that we started with. So we started with about 270 different plant taxa in there. So baseline is, pretty diverse for a beginning garden, right? And what we did, or what we tried to do, was to design the space so that we were using a lot of regionally native ground cover species, such as low-growing sedges, grasses, and then creeping herbaceous ground covers that would essentially serve as a 12-month green mulch to sort of cover the ground and provide all those garden services that we typically expect mulch to, right? So moderating temperature of the soil, retaining moisture, outcompeting, incoming weed seedlings, right? So that's sort of one way that we're trying to manage what we know will be an influx of weed seed. The other thing is that a lot of the native species that we started out with in the garden, we deliberately included because they themselves are heavy seeders. So part of the idea is that some of those species that we planted initially as plugs are actually going to self-sow, and that their progeny, their seed, are going to begin taking up real estate as well. I will tell you that we're definitely seeing some challenges with weedy species. species that, is particularly, in fact, because we're trying really hard to attract birds. And birds are huge seed vectors, right? I mean, you guys were talking about Oriental bittersweet earlier, and one of the ways that it gets around in the landscape as much as it does is because birds love to eat those seeds. And then they'll land somewhere and poop them out, and you'll get Oriental bittersweet vine growing right there. So we're starting to see incursions of these species that are really being vectored by birds. So that's kind of interesting. We're also seeing some weed species that, we're seeing move vegetatively through the gardens. So a lot of Artemisia vulgaris, mugwort, I think some of it was chopped up and was mixed throughout the garden in the soil. So that's been fun. That's a species that's really hard to weed out because of how it spreads vegetatively and rhizomatically. So, yeah, I mean, all that, kind of contributing to what we're starting to see emerge. In terms of how we manage it, when we were looking for a full-time gardener to manage that space, we were really looking for someone who had that encyclopedic knowledge of plants and who'd be able to identify Artemisia vulgaris in the garden. And I think that's one of the amazing things about gardeners, right? Is that like the typical experienced gardener in our region of the country is just going to straight up know like at least 500 plants, right? I mean, if not 1,000. If you've been gardening for 30 years, you definitely know 1,500 plants on site. If you're in this part of the world and you've been working professionally, right? So I think, huge shout out to gardeners, right? For the breadth of knowledge that we all just, professionally carry around. And so our gardener, Rochelle Stipchak, who's in charge of that garden, has that knowledge. And that's the kind of thing that we're, just hands-on teaching to our interns and our garden volunteers is, today we're going to deal with privet seedlings, right? And here's what the privet seedlings look like. And we're just going to look at these and pull them out, and we're not going to deal with anything else. So, instead of trying to teach the interns or the volunteers, like, hundreds of plants at once, we're just like, here's the one baddie we're going to deal with today.
Yeah, small bites. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that does strike me as a big challenge of working in a space like that is designed and marketed, as a space for pollinators and birds and wildlife, and is something I think that native plant gardeners run into a lot, is that a lot of these species do produce a lot of seeds, or anything that is related to mint will, have those runners and will, expand over whatever area you let it. And so sort of finding that balance of, but then, you're an arboretum and you want the space to look nice and not overgrown, but it has to have a natural feel to it. And that sort of balance seems difficult to achieve.
And also fun.
Oh yeah, well, definitely. I mean, as plant people, it's such a neat space to go into, and I think it does such a good job of as an educational space of illustrating different, not only different habitats, but also, you walk over. There's like a big patch of pycnanthemum, a clustered mountain mint, and it's just every time I've been there, it's like thousands upon thousands of bees, and that you can just see them and you can get close to them, and they don't, they have no idea that you're there because they're just busy foraging. And it's such a cool just visual of like, this is working.
Yeah, so I'm really glad you brought up that patch of clustered mountain mint, because that's actually the reason that patch is there, is because of advice that one of our entomology faculty friends, Harlan Patch, gave us. And he basically told us that honeybees are great at exploiting nectar and pollen resources. And when they find a high quality, super desirable source of nectar or pollen, they are also excellent at communicating that to everyone back at the hive and then getting the whole posse to come out, right? So he told us that clustered mountain mint is an extremely popular plant for honeybees, and that what we really could do and perhaps should do was to plant a really big patch of it so that we were able to demonstrate how effective honeybees are at like maximizing their use of a high quality resource like that, but also allowing an opportunity for other pollinating insects to be able to get in there. Because if you have a small patch of Pycnanthemum muticum, the clustered mountain mint, the honeybees will just chase everybody else off. But if you have a big patch of it, there's enough space for less aggressive or competitive solitary bees and other species, right, to be able to access that same resource. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like that's an excellent example of how we really used input and science from experts, to really design specific parts of the garden.
Yeah, that's very cool. Such a great visual. The other part that I love, that I think that I haven't seen in other gardens are the tree snags, like the dead trees that are being held up
Yes.
as habitat for birds. And I mean, so when you first see them, you're like, oh gosh, those trees died. They should really get rid of them.
Rough. Do these people know what they're doing?
Yeah, that's gonna fall on somebody, and because we're, especially again, we have our goggles on. We're used to looking in the landscape and seeing like, oh, that's dead. But that obviously that's an important aspect for the bird portion of this garden. And yeah, can you talk a little bit about those? Just they stick out to me as kind of an innovative, interesting part of that garden too.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the reasons that we have these big dead trees in the middle of the garden that are, typically called snags is really because of the input of our ornithologists and bird experts who are advising us on the garden. So, dead snag trees are really important vantage points for often predatory birds who will perch at the tops and gain a really unparalleled view of their environment. It enables them to identify prey that may not be aware of them, and then to be able to hunt effectively. So we've actually seen a lot of predatory birds, various species of hawks hanging out in the tops of those snags over the course of the year, which is really it's fun. It's fun to see that they're using the furniture, but another thing about snags is that they're not just helpful for raptors and other predatory birds. They're really important habitat elements for the entire ecosystem, right? So lots of other critters use them. Birds like nuthatches, creepers, woodpeckers, will all be pecking away at the bark and the wood of those snags, looking for insects that have decided to bore into the wood, either to consume it or to lay their eggs. So, those insects are using the wood as a resource, and then all of those other birds are using those insects as a resource, right? And as you get the creation of those cavities through, woodpeckers, mining, et cetera, what they're actually doing is creating space that then secondary cavity nesting birds, like maybe chickadees, can use as their nesting sites in the next season, right? And as you get this gradual kind of use and then decay of those snags, there's this huge sort of ecological cascade that happens there. So they're incredibly important. I think one of the things that we do in managed landscapes is take anything dead and like whisk it off stage right immediately. And I think one of the things that we really wanted to showcase with those snags is just the incredible use of dead plants and the life that can then emerge from those dead plants, right? And then also that, they're kind of visually striking. So that like, yeah, dead plants can be an aesthetic element in your garden space. It was actually very popular in the Victorian era to have like one wacko looking dead tree in your garden as a reminders of death were super popular in the Victorian era. It was the time of like the Romantic poets, Lord Byron, all those guys. And so they just wanted like, it's sort of the equivalent of like the human skull on your mahogany desk, is like your wacko dead tree in the garden. So
the circle of life.
I think that's a neat thing about the Penn State Arboretum and other arboretums is people go there for a lot of times the aesthetics, just a peaceful walk. But, there's this unconscious thing of education. So you talk about these dead snags. And years ago, I went to an arboretum that had some dead snags up, and I have a wood lot, and I would just clear out everything for the fireplace, just not necessarily to make it nice. It was just wood I could put in the fire, cure it and so forth. And now I remove a couple of them, but I leave a lot of the snags up. And I've noticed, I got birds, woodpeckers living in them and other things. You talk about the raptors up on these dead branches overlooking the cornfield. And so I think that's kind of really neat that it's a way to educate, but maybe it's not blaring. It's there as you walk by and people are like, oh, what's that do? Or what's that for? And, kind of seeps in.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, definitely. Like people's first, oh my gosh, when we were building this, it was hilarious. Like, the folks who were, on the construction team who were working with us were like, can you explain why we are doing this, please?
So these are the same people that brought in the Hosler oak that, they're big root balls and took care of it for years. And then you're bringing in this dead tree trunk, the disparity there.
Exactly. And then also, so these were the two trees that we brought in were two Table Mountain pine trees that we were able to harvest from Penn State's Stone Valley Forest. And so they still had their needles on in their pine trees. And then, pine trees can hold on to their needles, even to dead needles, for quite a long time. So it was like 6 months of these needles gradually bleaching out and then browning out and then slowly dropping. And people would come up to my office and be like, you have two trees that I'm very concerned about not doing well.
Oh,
yeah, they're probably questioning the horticulture abilities of Penn State.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So I know for the planting process, you guys relied heavily on volunteer labor, I guess. And that was like mid-pandemic, right? Like 2020. So can you talk a little bit about the role of volunteers in, I guess, the Arboretum in general, but also for that planting and getting everything in the ground for that garden?
Yeah, the Arboretum absolutely runs on volunteers, and we couldn't do anything that you see being done out there without all of the volunteers who help us. So an example is that we have 3 horticulturists and 1 groundsperson. And, we're maintaining 10 acres of botanic gardens with, hundreds of thousands of plants. So the only reason that the gardens look the way they do is because of our garden volunteers. So we have an amazing posse of probably about 15 volunteers who come out 2 mornings a week and just work with our gardeners on whatever needs to be done in the gardens. And those are only one of our volunteer teams. So we also have a children's and family education team that does all of the activities and programs in our children's garden. We have bird education volunteers who lead bird walks for people and manage our bird banding program. We have volunteer tour guides who will give guided tours for groups all year round. We have folks who just work on our woodland trails and our prairie with our natural lands team. We've got people who just work with us to help us put on our big annual festivals. So, I mean, it's an enormous team of people. We also have volunteer educators, from Extension, actually. So master gardeners have been absolutely incredible to work with and do a huge number of educational programs at the gardens every year. So yeah, volunteers are definitely where it's at. For the pollinator and bird garden, we actually had over 600 different volunteers come out to help us.
Wow.
And yeah, it was amazing. So what we did was when we were designing the plantings, we decided to, instead of purchasing, finish sized containerized perennials, we decided to buy all plugs. So either 32 or 50 cell plug trays, all of which I had contract grown mostly through Pennsylvania based nurseries. So, those plugs are really small and they're very easy for people to plant. What we did was to lay them out on the ground the day before a planting, exactly where they were going to be planted, and then bring all of the volunteers onto the construction site the following day, the planting day. And bringing volunteers onto an active construction site is not something that Penn State typically does. And so I feel like it was just really wonderful and affirming that we were able to gain the confidence of the administration and get permission to safely and responsibly bring volunteers onto an active job site. Because it's such a cool experience, right? Like putting on a hard hat and safety glasses and actually going into a place that's under construction. I just feel like it's so rare for people to get that experience. And then for those 600 plus people who were able to do that with us, they got to be part of actually building the garden. They saw it when there were still like giant pits in the ground. And so then when the garden was finished and open to the public, they were able to bring, their friends and family and colleagues in and say, like, I actually helped build this. Like, this is the part of the garden that we planted the first day I came out. And that was a hole in the ground. And so they have this experience, their ownership of the space, which is like a legitimately earned ownership that, like, that's the other thing is like, I want everyone to feel like they own the Arboretum, right? Because really they do. And people should feel like they have authorship of the space, like they can get involved, like they can be personally proud of what they have done there. And then also they should feel like they can just tell us what they think and what they think should be out there, right? And have us be open and receptive to that. So yeah, I mean, it was funny during COVID because in addition to like your normal construction site PPE, like hard hat, glasses, gloves, we were also like, and then we're all wearing like, N95 masks and we're all sanitizing and we have this whole protocol. So it was like extra fun from a procedural perspective, but it was also really wonderful to be able to be offering this opportunity for people to do something, alongside other people in a COVID safe space where everyone was physically distanced, everyone was outdoors, and, people could feel like they were contributing to a community effort, which I think people were really hungering for during that time of isolation, but we were able to do it responsibly. And that was something that I felt really grateful for, that we were in a position where we were able to do that for the community, and that so many community members, I mean, over 600 people, felt comfortable enough and motivated enough that they actually helped us out. If we hadn't had those volunteers, we would not have been able to plant that garden. So, I mean, we needed the level of support that we got, like it wasn't just pretending that there was a fun volunteer opportunity for people. It was like, no, we really need the community in order to make this garden happen. And people were just, we were just like kind of floored by how enthusiastic people were about it.
Yeah, I saw Claudia Vest gave a presentation about the development of the garden at the last Perennial Plant Association conference. And she showed pictures of those planting days. And it's like years from now, you'll know exactly like, oh, I know exactly when that must have happened because everyone's masking outdoors and, we're going to have, I don't know, it was such a cool thing to see people pulling through and obviously like having so much fun and feeling good about what they were doing. So, yeah. So Shari, I think we're about ready to wrap up. And we had mentioned that at the beginning of the episode that you were the outgoing director of operations. And so we'd love you to share, what are your future plans once you leave the Arboretum?
Yeah, well, so I'm leaving my staff position at the Arboretum in order to pursue a PhD here at Penn State in the Recreation, Park, and Tourism Management program. So that's something that I'm really, really excited about. Just really looking forward to engaging with Penn State as a student. I've taught a lot here and I've facilitated a lot of faculty and student research. I think that it's going to be really fun to be on the other side of that, to be here primarily as a learner and primarily as a researcher. But before I get started on that PhD, I'm actually taking 6 months to do a long distance hike in New Zealand. So I'm going to be through hiking their national trail, which is called the Te Araroa Trail. It is about the same length as the Appalachian Trail here in the US. And similarly kind of runs the entire length of the country. So I leave in less than a month.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow. You're gonna have a lot of plant stories for us when you get back, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've never visited New Zealand before, but in the land of ornamental horticulture, especially fine gardening, there are a lot of plants from New Zealand that are, considered really special and that, play a role in design. There are also a number of incredible gardens in New Zealand, both, run by governmental bodies and also private gardens. But I'm going to basically be spending most of my time in New Zealand's natural areas, most of which are kind of managed by their Department of Conservation. So,
well, maybe we could have you when you return before you start your PhD program, have you back on our podcast and talk about the plant life on those islands.
Oh man, yes, I would love that. I feel like, I'm gonna be. How when you're like out botanizing with people and you're like realizing like, oh, this started out as a walk and now we're just like crouched on the ground and like didn't gain any miles at all. I feel like I'm gonna have to guard against that because the goal really is to walk this trail.
Yeah. You need blinders.
It's going to be able to finish the walk.
Yeah, it is 1,800 miles long, so I am gonna have to actually like move. So I'm gonna have to guard against just like standing and staring at all plants while I'm out there. So that's like a high class challenge to have those.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we can't wait to follow along with that and see what you do in your career with your PhD program. And thank you so much for coming on the show. This was an awesome conversation. We love the Arboretum. It's an amazing spot, and I hope all of our listeners make a plan to visit at some point. And Shari, we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's so much fun to talk with you guys.
All right. Take care.